What's up everyone, Alex here. Change can be highly disruptive, and for a genre whose fans loudly espouse the values of turn-based combat and why it should stay the way it's been for more than 3 decades, any slight change could be seen in a fatalistic fashion. And yet, there are certain games, like last year's Chained Echoes, that took a big risk and shifted the thinking of many longtime fans, demonstrating that change doesn't always have to be a bad thing. This year, the folks over at XSEED Games are trying to change the way we play JRPGs in Loop8 Summer of Gods, promising a gameplay loop that is unlike anything we've ever experienced before. But one has to wonder, does Loop8 execute on its grand visions in spectacular fashion? In Loop8 Summer of Gods, you play the role of Nini. Nini is a young teenager who has lived most of his life in space. The Kegai, an evil force that threatens the extinction of mankind, has been hunting down our species for all eternity. And somehow, the small town of Ashihara in Japan, a town seemingly stuck in the early 80s, has remained untouched. That is, until you arrive at said town and the Kegai begin their nightly infiltrations, possessing unsuspecting victims with the goal of destroying the last bastion of humanity. There, you'll meet friends who can aid you in combat, ones you'll have to spend the time to get close to, because in Loop8 Summer of Gods, your relationship with others, as well as one another, determines how strong you'll be in battle. Visually, Loop8 Summer of Gods is stunning and leans heavily into the idea that it's a playable anime, right down to its low animation frame rate that mimics the latest 3D rendered anime. I remember seeing trailers for this game and I couldn't believe how incredible the game looked. The music composed for the game gives this slice-of-life vibe that it tries to portray itself as, with dynamic music changing depending on the prevailing mood of the area, with appropriate music when you're in the underworld and hunting down the Kegai. You're able to choose English or Japanese voice acting in the game, and given that I played with the former, I was at least hoping the voices to have adequate lip syncing. But as I suspected, the lip syncing is matched to the Japanese voices, so this can be a bit jarring to watch. From the very start, the game proposes that how you choose to play Loop8 will be uniquely your story, which implies so much with those words. While the game presents this lofty idea of having you create your own story, the way Loop8 narratively handles its characters doesn't feel quite meaningful as, say, the social links of Persona. Instead of focusing on delivering unique character moments that help set the tone and the importance of developing each character, the gameplay often devolves into a dialogue mashfest to try and max out relationships in order to ensure that you've got the power to defeat the Kegai in the underworld. It's a JRPG where the typical experience point/leveling progression is ripped out and replaced with a relationship-driven system that's often found in visual novels. But Loop8 is not a visual novel, nor is it anything like Persona's social link system. It is a mechanically gameplay-heavy game, one that forces you to check on people's feelings and motivations on the regular, while also managing the prevailing mood of the area brought upon by the presence of certain characters in the vicinity. It is a seemingly straightforward, yet ultimately obtuse game where tutorials will confuse rather than clarify. To put it kindly, it really is unlike any JRPG you've ever played before. The game starts simple enough, with the goal of ultimately defeating the Kegai that plague Ashihara. You do this by going about your daily life, talking to the specific characters who you'll want to quickly increase your relationship with, all the while ensuring that you build up your own stats by engaging in training activities. So when the time comes to face one of these demonic beings, the hope is that your combined stats will be enough to defeat them in combat. But you'll find that just one loop through the game won't make you powerful enough. And so you reset the loop, meaning that all of your hard-earned relationships and stats will reset back to their original values. though something strange will happen the next time through, because it'll become easier to get back up to those values prior to the reset. However, the victims this time around will be totally different, forcing you to go through it all over again. What does stick around after every reset are the various blessings that you'll get by focusing on building your relationship with a particular character, which includes Nini himself. These blessings are permanent stat boosts, and these serve as makeshift rewards for reaching certain relationship milestones. It's in this sense that the gameplay loop functions similarly to a roguelike, where every time you die or hit the reset button, certain stats will remain. But let's talk about the original concept, that is, removing the usual experience point / leveling system. You might think that removing these is a boon, an innovation even, given that it sounds as though the moment-to-moment grinding is replaced by relationship building. And I can't blame you, especially if you consider that relationship building in visual novels usually amounts to talking to someone and making one carefully made dialogue choice. But as I said earlier, Loop8 isn't a visual novel. The reality of it all is Loop8's relationships do not hinge on just one meticulously thought out dialogue choice. Rather, it's a summation of many small conversations you initiate, and often in rapid succession. And by rapid succession, I'm not being metaphorical here. I really am mashing through tons of text. In other words, they're still grinding. Relationship building works like this. You choose a person you want to get to know, encounter them somewhere in town, and repeatedly talk to them until you start getting multiple choices called suggestions. This tells you that you've built up enough rapport with said person to have deeper conversations or engage in activities with them. These suggestions help build up 3 different feelings between Nini and said person: friendliness, affection, and hatred. The strength of these emotions determine how much damage you and your party inflict during combat. And keep in mind that this affects the entire party, as in the relationship of the 2 other party members you're bringing with you is just as important as Nini's relationships with them. Grinding the further relationships means that you'll eventually encounter diminishing returns for repeatedly invoking suggestions, which might not be good, especially if you want them to join you in a dungeon. One time, I was trying to grind out relationship stats for a particular character, then asked them to join my party, only to have them leave later on as I try to recruit my 3rd party member due to boredom or some such. That's when I realized that saving some of these suggestions and interacting with them as I'm assembling the team seemed to make things better. The presence of other characters in the area also affects the efficacy of these suggestions. One person could completely alter the mood of the area, making a normal mood into a tense one. The trouble with all of this is that the moods for each character are seemingly randomized, so one person who may make an area tense, for instance, may not do so the next day, let alone a few hours from now. But you simply can't just focus on building up your relationships and stats, as there's a deadline to be respected, which means you'll have to open up the gate to the underworld and defeat the invading Kegai as soon as you're able. You'll open these gates by deciphering the clues shown as you rest overnight, containing hints as to who the next victim is, the relationship level that you need to build them up to, where they might be, and what time of day that they can be found. And because Loop8 randomizes every victim after defeating the first boss and every reset, you'll have to pay attention to these signs, as no 2 playthroughs are alike. The underworld is mainly just a spookier representation of Ashihara, which means there's not much in terms of variety here. You'll be exploring parts of town as part of hunting down that week's Kegai, while trying to fulfill various stat checks brought upon by dark orbs scattered in each zone. Once unlocked, these dark orbs give you keys to unlock gated sections of the underworld, where the Kegai is hiding out. The battles play out by having you be in control of Nini, and Nini only, with the rest of your party behaving based on your relationships with them. Unfortunately, as with most of the game's tutorials, the game doesn't make it clear how exactly your party members will behave. As someone who actually replayed through the entirety of Persona 4 with my party members set to choose their own actions, I felt that the choices taken by the AI in that game made much more sense to me than Loop 8's. So if you're the kind of person who would much rather take control of your party members, especially in clutch situations, I'm sad to say that there's no such option to be had here. What Loop 8 is trying to do is that it's taking elements of visual novels, like relationship flags and such, and using them to calculate stats like each character's physical and mental strengths, and applying those numbers across the entire party, determining their battle strength, so to speak. Where it fails to make things interesting is the part that many story-driven JRPG fans find important: character development and a plot. I'll be brutally honest, mashing through the talk button is not fun. And keep in mind that I'm not simply blowing through tons of text here. I am reading through it. Sometimes, the flavor text gives you more context as to what's happening around you, but not enough for you to truly comprehend the gravity of the situation. Which is weird because you'd think that you'd feel more invested in preventing the extinction of humanity. Also, there are some people who are highly aware of the existence of loops in the world, a fact that you'll be privy to early in the game, which somewhat dampens the whole urgency of having to defeat the Kegai if people can simply reset the loop and start over. There's also the presence of numerous loading screens in the game. Whether you're accessing the map, loading the party menu, or simply just going from one portion of the world to another, you'll be greeted by loading screens each time. It personally didn't bother me as much, but it did make me question how long these loading times totally cost me in the end. With all that said, while Loop 8 does contain elements of visual novels, I am puzzled by the lack of visual novel features in the game that would have greatly enhanced the experience of playing Loop 8. For one, the lack of a text log baffles me, as it's very easy for players to accidentally mash through repeated text if their goal is to grind suggestions. Just because you started getting suggestions doesn't mean that the character won't interject with unique dialogue in between said suggestions either. The game also doesn't have a skip dialogue function, which is a feature found in visual novels that lets players skip dialogue that's already been read. This would have been especially helpful after resetting, when you encounter similar dialogue from previous loops. Instead, there's a fast-forward function that just skips everything. Suffice it to say, while there's a lot of bits and bobs that min-maxers are able to examine and deconstruct to find out how everything works, the rest of us who expected Loop 8 to play more like a visual novel and were hungry for a well-told tale with tons of character development won't find a lot here. While I, for one, love that Loop 8 took a crazy risk to blend the elements of two genres together, I also felt that the team over-designed the game in such a way that it became mostly about the numbers rather than the believability of the town you're inhabiting, ironically sapping the soul of the humans that inhabit Ashihara. Loop 8 Summer of Gods just needed a little bit more meat in the bone in terms of its narrative, as well as a more thoughtful design that should have made every moment meaningful. Instead, along with its less than stellar tutorials, the experience of playing Loop 8 is mostly like feeling your way through the dark, one that felt like it had no end in sight. As much as I hate delivering bad news like this, I do want to direct your attention to the fact that June is gonna be an incredible month with truly amazing games, and that Loop 8 is just one of those 12. So if you want to find out what other games are going to be available to pick up, click the video up top to find out what games are coming out in June. And above all else, I want to hear what you think of this review. Post your thoughts in the comments below and let's talk about it. Thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.